Sylvie of Amber Apartments by J. Grace Pennington. Narrated by J. Grace Pennington. Year 5. Sylvie Keller lived just where Main Street dipped down into an intersection with Union Avenue in an apartment building that was 4 stories tall and was fringed by lines of carefully spaced beech trees. She had lived here in this 4th-floor apartment ever since being brought home from the hospital as a baby. Of course, she didn't remember this, but Mom and Dad and her older brother Bill had told her about it. She had been born on the 25th of November, which was usually right around the time people began decorating for Christmas. When her 5th birthday was coming up, she noticed the lights on houses as they drove by, and she noticed Mom putting a tree in their living room. "Is it my birthday tree?" she asked. Mom laughed. "It's a Christmas tree. Christmas is just a month away." Then Sylvie had some fuzzy recollection of Christmas last year. She remembered boxes wrapped in paper and getting a new teddy bear and eating a lot of food at Nana and Papa's house. "Will I get another teddy bear?" she asked. "Mr. Pickles needs a friend." "Maybe. Or maybe you'll get something else completely new. Who knows?" And Mom put a disc in the CD player. "Oh, the weather outside is frightful, but the fire is so delightful. And since we've no place to go, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow." Mom sang along to the words, smiling as she put little colored balls on the tree. Sylvie listened to her for a minute, then ran to the window to watch for the snow. To her disappointment, there was none. Christmas morning, 10-year-old Bill shook her awake. "It's Christmas!" he shouted. Sylvie blinked up at him for a minute before catching his enthusiasm and jumping out of bed. They both ran into the living room where Mom and Dad waited with smiles, presents, and Christmas cookies. "Wait, hold on there," Dad said as Sylvie reached for the biggest box she could see. "Let's read first." Then he read the Christmas story from his big leather Bible. Sylvie squirmed in her pink footy pajamas waiting for him to finish. Bill handed her a cookie shaped like a bell, and she munched it gratefully. Finally, Dad said, "Okay, time for presents." Sylvie didn't get a teddy bear. Instead, she got a toy horse and a coloring book and something she did not understand at first. "What is it?" she asked, turning what looked like a huge, oddly shaped cardboard book over in her hands. "It's a play set," Mom explained. "See, you open it." She helped Sylvie untie the bows that bound the edges of the book together. As it opened, whole rooms popped out, complete with cardboard beds, wardrobes, chairs, and kitchen. Sylvie's eyes widened. "Thank you." "There are dolls you can play with in it. See?" Mom reached into one of the rooms and pulled out not dolls, but tiny cardboard cutout figures. 2 older people with gray hair, a man and a woman, a girl with long black hair, a boy with big eyes and brown overalls, and a slender girl with red braids. The latter caught Sylvie's attention. She set the house carefully on the ground and reached for the red-headed girl. "Her name is Anne," Mom explained with a smile. "They're characters from a book called Anne of Green Gables. I thought I could read it to you sometime and you could act out the story." Sylvie had never seen anything like it. She dropped the cutouts, hugged Mom, then said, "Can we play it now?" Mom checked the clock. "We have some time. I'll read you a few chapters." She pulled a yellow book off the shelf, opened it, and began to read. Mrs. Rachel Lynde lived just where the Avonlea main road dipped down into a little hollow fringed with alders and ladies' eardrops, and traversed by a brook that had its source away back in the woods of the old Cuthbert place. Sylvie didn't know who Mrs. Rachel Lynde was, or what alders or ladies' eardrops were, or what traversed meant, so she just explored the house until her mother got to the 2nd chapter. She wore a faded brown sailor hat, Mom read, and beneath the hat, extending down her back, were 2 braids of very thick, decidedly red hair. Sylvie picked up the red-haired doll and studied it. This, then, must be that girl. She listened a little harder after that, and laughed when the girl talked about thinking she would have to spend the night in a tree. Just as she was really getting interested, Mom closed the book and said, "It's time to get ready for dinner. Want to read more tomorrow?" Sylvie nodded, placed the dolls back in the house, and went to put on her favorite Christmas dress. "I wish my hair was red," she thought. Year 6. And upstairs in the east gable, a lonely, heart-hungry friend— Sylvie paused and ran her finger under the word, trying to sound it out. Friendless child cried herself to sleep. She nodded proudly and closed the book. Sylvie, lights out, Mom called. Sylvie frowned. I read a whole chapter by myself, she called back. Mom appeared in the doorway, wet hair falling around her face. A chapter of what? She saw the book and chuckled. I'm not sure it counts as reading if you have the book memorized. Sylvie was indignant. I don't have it memorized. Not all the words, just sort of the story. Well, you're reading very well, and I'm proud of you. Mom crossed the room and bent to kiss Sylvie's forehead, gently prying the book from her hands at the same time. But it's bedtime. You can read more tomorrow. Reluctantly, Sylvie burrowed under the covers. Mom? Yes, dear? Mom turned the lamp off, causing the nightlight to cast soft blue light into the little bedroom. Can I have a dress with puff sleeves for Christmas? A dress with— Mom laughed. Do you even know what puffed sleeves are? Yes, big sleeves, like so big you can hardly fit through the door. Mom just laughed again, which hurt Sylvie's feelings a little bit. I don't know. Puffed sleeves aren't really something they put on clothes anymore. Maybe, though? Maybe. Now go to sleep. And Mom left the room, taking the book with her. Sylvie waited until the sound of footsteps on the carpet died away, then scurried out of bed and crept to the window. Moonlight spilled over pale beech trees down below, making it Sylvie's very own white way of delight. She smiled. Then she looked up toward the stars. They weren't very bright. They never were here. At Nana and Papa's, Sylvie could see 10 billion stars stretching into infinity. But here in the city, they looked choked out a little. But if she looked hard enough, she could still see them. Hello, fairies, she whispered. Mom had told her fairies weren't real, and really Sylvie knew that, but she liked to imagine that they were, and that they were keeping watch up there in the sky, keeping her safe. She liked to believe things that weren't true sometimes. She didn't know why. It just gave her a sweet and sour sort of feeling in her stomach, a beautiful longing for something that she couldn't see. That's why she had made Mom read her Anne of Green Gables over and over until Mom said she needed to learn to read so that she could read it to herself. It gave her the same sense, a pleasant sort of pain, a wishing. I learned to read, she told them, still peering at the faint dots of light. To read a real big book, and I'm only 6. I think that was pretty impressive. The stars only blinked back. The feeling was stronger than usual tonight. It pulled at Sylvie's chest, physically tugged it. She wished she could climb up into the stars and be there with them. Then maybe they would talk back to her. Imagination, of course. Smiling, she raced back to her bed, grabbed her pillow and blanket, and dragged them over to the window. She laid down on the floor, got all comfortable and cuddled, and looked out at the stars, willing her imagination to let her fly. She only had to wait long enough, and it did. After getting very tired, she finally felt herself lifted gently from her little nest and up through the air towards the window. She put her hand out sleepily to touch it, and her hand went right on through as if the glass were jello. Grinning, she leaned forward and plunged through the window to the other side, where she was lifted all the way up to the stars. There she stopped and floated in midair. She blinked and squinted. She could see the stars all around her, but they were still far away. Hello, she called, and her voice echoed a little. One of the stars floated closer, and as it came within a few feet, she was delighted to see that it was indeed a tiny, bright fairy in a delicate, floating lace dress with flowing blonde hair. Its face glowed with starlight. Hello, Sylvie said again, this time in a whisper. The fairy flew right up to her, dainty wings fluttering faster than the eye could truly see. It smiled. Sylvie smiled back. Then her peripheral vision showed more of them coming over to her, and she turned her head to look. Dozens of them, all tinted different colors, but all as bright as could be. I knew it was you, she said, and held out her hand. One of them, a green one, flitted closer and sat cross-legged on her hand. Its wings stilled, and Sylvie caught her breath at how thin and bright they were. Now you can talk to me, she said. The fairy shook its tiny head and held out its hands as if to say, "I'm sorry." "Oh," Sylvie said, heart sinking. "Can you not speak?" The little creature shook its head again. "Well, I'm glad I got to see you anyway." The fairy stood, brushed off its dress with hands the size of Sylvie's little fingertip, and fluttered away. "Can I come with you?" Sylvie called after it. "What are you doing?" Sylvie blinked. Who had said that? Silly girl, was there something wrong with your bed? She opened her eyes, and to her disappointment it was morning. She was back on the floor, and sunlight flooded the room. Mom was leaning over her with a bewildered smile. Blinking sleepily, Sylvie gathered her blanket up into her arms. "I just wanted to sleep by the window." "Well, maybe we can move your bed over there if you like, but it's time for breakfast now and Christmas shopping later." Breakfast, beds, and even Christmas shopping seemed like rather boring things after Sylvie's journey. As Mom left the room, Sylvie turned to look out the window again, then blew the absent star fairies a kiss. Bill was on the computer when she poked him in the shoulder the next day. "Guess what?" He didn't turn around. He was playing some game where you were under the sea and swam around looking for treasure chests and avoiding sharks. "You bought my Christmas present," he said. "No. Well, maybe, but that's not what I meant." "What then?" She crept around the side of his chair and forced her face into his field of vision. "I went to see the stars last night." He glanced at her for just a moment. "Outside, you mean?" "No, like actually went to see them." He looked back at his game, clicking furiously to avoid the sharks. "Where'd you get a spaceship, Sylvie?" That's what he had called her when she was born, and it had never quite worn off. "Not in a spaceship." She rolled her eyes. "I just went. I floated up out the window and went to the sky, and I saw them. They were fairies, actually." "Stars aren't fairies." Bill clicked on a treasure chest and collected its contents. "They're burning balls of gas." "No, they aren't. They're fairies." "Okay." She stared at his face, which was still glued to the screen, then punched him in the arm as hard as she could and ran away. "Ow!" he cried. Mom came to find her before too long. "Sylvie?" she said, pushing the door open. Sylvie didn't actually see her because she was face down on her bed, hiding among the pillows. But she heard her and heard the door squeaking. She didn't respond. Footsteps padded on the carpet, then she felt the bed shift a little as Mom sat on the end of it. "Why did you hit your brother? You need to apologize. You know that's not okay." "He ruined everything," she said, voice muffled. Mom gently gripped her shoulders and turned her over. "What do you mean?" Sylvie explained about the flight and the fairies and the magic, and how she had told Bill and he had just ruined the whole thing. Mom looked like she wasn't sure whether she should laugh or not, but she didn't. She did smile, though. "Sylvie, you've said several things that aren't true. You know fairies aren't real and that what happened was only a dream, right?" Sylvie didn't know what to say. Mom was right, she did know that, but she also didn't. It was hard to explain, but she knew Mom wouldn't understand, so she nodded. "Okay, and that's fine. It's fine to imagine and pretend. It's good for your little brain." Mom tapped both sides of Sylvie's forehead with her fingertips. "It's fun. But that also means you can't be mad when people don't want to pretend with you. It's not true that Bill ruined anything. He just doesn't want to play that game. That doesn't mean you can't still play it." Sylvie didn't know how to feel about this. On the one hand, she liked the idea that nothing was ruined. If Bill wanted to be stupid, he could. It didn't need to ruin what she had. But on the other hand, she felt somehow like she was holding on to her beautiful evening by a slender silver thread, and that if she let go for a second by believing in her heart of hearts that it hadn't been real, the whole thing would float away and she would be stuck on the ground again, fairyless. "You need to tell your brother you're sorry for hitting him." Mom kissed her on the forehead. "And then do you want to help me wrap some presents?" By Christmas morning, Sylvie had almost forgiven Bill. Enough at least that she let him eat one of the cookies she had decorated, though the cookie he chose was ironically shaped like a star, and that irritated her a little bit. She felt fidgety while Dad read the Christmas story. Mom never put the presents out until Christmas morning, so it was only now that Sylvie could see just how many presents were wrapped in the purple and white polka dots that meant they were for her. She kept sneaking glances in that direction to try to count them, at least 10. Finally, it was time to open the presents. She held out her arms, and they were filled with little rectangle-shaped packages. She opened the first one, Little House in the Big Woods. It was a book. She looked up at Mom, who was smiling broadly. Now that you can read, we thought you should try something else. Maybe a few somethings, Dad nodded. She raced to open the other books. Nancy Drew, The Wizard of Oz, 2 more Nancy Drew books, 2 more Little House books, Little Women. With each book that she unwrapped, she felt more and more of a sort of building excitement in her chest. It wasn't a dress with puffed sleeves, but there was so much to explore, so many ways that she could search for more of the feeling that she loved from Anne. She ran to hug Mom. Thank you. Hey, what about me? Dad cried. I picked out a couple myself. Sylvie ran to the other side of the room to hug him, too. Then she gathered as many of her new books as she could carry and took them to her room. She spent the whole day reading, or trying to read. She read the first few chapters of 3 of the books, the first Nancy Drew, the first Little House, and Little Women. She read them slowly, painstakingly, looking for something new to love, but she looked back towards her first love, the yellow-covered paperback on her bedside table. Without hesitation, she picked it up, opened it, and began to read. It was broad daylight when Anne awoke and sat up in bed, staring confusedly at the window through which a flood of cheery sunshine was pouring. Year 7. What color is our house? Dad looked up from the paperwork he had been doing at the table. We don't have a house, he told her. She strung another piece of popcorn onto the needle and thread Mom had given her. I mean our apartment. Dad rubbed his chin, which was a little scratchy with beard hairs. I think the building is, I'm not sure what you'd call it, orangish? Sylvie put the popcorn down and wrinkled her nose. But orange doesn't rhyme with apartments. Dad laughed and reached for her hand. She let him take it in his big, strong one, and he pulled her close and put his arm around her. Orange doesn't rhyme with anything. Yes, it does. Open, or ordinary, or olive. That's not rhyming, Dad said, looking like he was trying not to laugh more. That's alliteration. What's alliteration? That's when things start with the same letter. But why does it matter, sweetums? I want it to be like Green Gables, she said. He laughed and rubbed his chin one more time before letting go of her. Well, orange is a little like amber. You could call it Amber Apartments if you want. It sounded so pretty, and it gave Sylvie a tiny hint of that tingly feeling she loved so much. So I could be Sylvie of Amber Apartments? Absolutely. With a last encouraging smile, Dad turned back to his paperwork. Now I need to finish this, and you need to finish that popcorn string before Mom gets back. She wants to decorate the tree tonight. As Sylvie finished the popcorn string, which of course included eating about a third of the pieces, she ran the title over and over in her mind. Sylvie of Amber Apartments. Sylvie of Amber Apartments. Sylvie of Amber Apartments. She liked it. Anne would approve. Why did you name me Sylvie? She asked as she set the completed string on the table. Dad looked up from the letter he was signing. Mom just liked the name. She thought it was pretty, and so do I. Why? Don't you like it? It's okay, she answered. Is there something you would have preferred? Dad's voice was steady, but she could see a twinkle in his eye as he licked an envelope, and she knew he wasn't looking for a serious answer. Just wondering, she said, and ran to put the empty popcorn bowl into the sink. Where are you going? Dad asked as she tried to sneak past him into the living room. To read until Mom comes back. And what's in your hand? She produced an apple. Mom lets me have one when I read. All right, just be ready to stop and help when she gets here. With a happy nod, Sylvie trotted into the living room where she had left her book on the coffee table earlier. The Christmas tree was already set up, and the lights were strung around its branches, softly illuminating the room. Sylvie put one finger on the light switch before changing her mind and just heading over to the tree. She plopped down on her tummy next to it, opened her book to the page number she'd memorized — Sylvie never used bookmarks — and began to read and munch. She wasn't reading Anne this time. She had decided to try again to give another book a chance. So far the book seemed promising. It was called Island of the Blue Dolphins, and Sylvie had already read several chapters. The main character, Karana, was nothing at all like Anne. Where Anne was romantic and imaginative, Karana was just trying to survive and was eminently practical. But there were moments where the island felt magical and where Karana tried to make herself beautiful things even though there was no one there to see her. And in those moments, Sylvie felt a little pull in her chest, thinking about what it would be like to be trapped on an island by herself, and how she could find ways to make beauty part of her days there. She finished a chapter, then pulled herself out of the story to take in what she had read. She had learned to do that a few months before, learned that if she took a short break between chapters, she could remember it all better and could process it. She could let the feelings sink in and feel them more strongly. The house was quiet. She could hear the occasional rustling of a single piece of paper from the dining room where Dad was working, and the hum of the heater, but that was all. She looked up at the twinkling lights on the tree and let the silence sink in along with all the emotions. She squinted to make the lights look like little stars and smiled. A few more times she had visited the fairies. Of course she knew that these were only dreams, but she liked to imagine, and therefore believe, that it was true. And here were more fairies, dancing among the needles of the tree, laughing together, a voiceless, silvery laugh that you felt more than heard. The laughter felt like she thought Karana must have felt, standing on the high point of her island and seeing the dolphin shape spread out before her. Like Anne must have felt when she learned she could stay at Green Gables. It felt like home, but better than real home. If she squinted just the right amount, just a little more than usual, she could make the lights actually look like fairy shapes. She smiled in delight as one of them seemed to wink at her and put a delicate finger to its lips. It was a secret between herself and them, the tiny Christmas spirits. "Sylvie!" Mom's voice pulled her from the reverie, and her eyes opened so that the fairies vanished abruptly and became nothing but tiny light bulbs again. "Come help carry the groceries, please." With a last look at the light, Sylvie put her book on the coffee table and ran to help. Sylvie tried not to wiggle while Dad read the Christmas story. It helped to shift her focus to the presents under the now fully decorated tree. This time there were only 2 for her, but one of them was big. She had only put 2 things on her Christmas list, books and a puff-sleeved dress, and the big box looked too big and the other box looked too longish, though it could still be a dress. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherd said to them, Dad finished. He closed the Bible and smiled at the rest of the family. "Before we move on to the presents, I want each of us to say one thing we're thankful for. We can just assume that you're thankful for God and family. I'd like to hear something unique. It can be small or big or anything. Just something that has made this year better for you. For me, I'm going to say I'm thankful for Mom's cooking." He winked at her. Mom laughed. Let's see. I'll say I'm thankful for the washer and dryer." This time Dad laughed. "They make my life better," Mom protested. "Bill?" Bill thought for a minute and then shrugged. "I guess number 2 pencils." "Number 2 pencils?" Dad laughed harder. Bill shrugged again but grinned. "Sylvie?" Dad prompted. Sylvie had been thinking hard. What did make her life better? Books, obviously, especially Anne, but she didn't really feel like saying that. She wanted another answer, something less obvious, something that had made her days more beautiful. She looked at the tree again. "Imagination," she answered. Mom smiled at her. "And you have a wonderful imagination." Sylvie smiled back. "Now," Dad clapped his hands, "presents! I can't wait to see what I got you all." Since Mom did all the shopping, he always made this joke. The presents were handed out. Sylvie opened her big one first. It was a purple beanbag chair. "I thought you could read in it," Mom explained. "Maybe by your window." Sylvie liked the idea and vowed to try it later that afternoon. She felt a little not quite nervous, but not quite excited either, as she opened the other present. Could it be her dress, finally? No, but she still caught her breath with delight. It was a doll, soft-bodied with smooth, pale, freckled skin, green eyes, and 2 long red braids. "Is it?" Sylvie gasped before reading the words on the bottom of the box just before the opening that showed the doll. Anne of Green Gables. She hugged the box tightly and then dropped it and ran to hug Mom. Mom laughed. "Now go set up your chair and read a bit before dinner. I know you want to." With a big grin, Sylvie tucked the doll under one arm and dragged the beanbag chair off to her room. It was the perfect size to snuggle down into with a doll and a book. She carefully put the Anne doll next to her, gave it a kiss, then opened Island of the Blue Dolphins. Then she hesitated. She looked at the doll, then the book, then the doll again. Then she put the book down, picked up the worn yellow paperback on her windowsill, and began to read it instead, aloud, so the doll could hear. For reasons best known to herself, Marilla did not tell Anne that she was to stay at Green Gables until the next afternoon. Year 8. Christmas was Sylvie's favorite holiday. She loved almost everything about it. The lights, the presents, the food, the shopping, the annual morning ritual her family had. Getting up early, sitting in the living room all wrapped in blankets, listening to the Christmas story and eating cookies while everyone opened their gifts. It was after that she didn't like. The bustle and joy of the morning was like soaring into a cold blue sky with the wind in her hair, and that made the afterwards a crash to the earth. After all that was done, Mom would always go take a nap. Dad would go read for a while and then fall asleep himself. Bill would play whatever new game he had gotten, and Sylvie would read, which she loved to do, of course. But Christmas was supposed to be special. It wasn't just supposed to be Christmas morning with a Christmas dinner tacked on to the evening. It was supposed to be Christmas Day. For Christmas the year she turned 8, she didn't get any books, or really anything she could use just then and there. She didn't even get the puffed-sleeve dress she had asked for yet again. Oh yes, Mom had gotten her a dress, a very pretty purple one with yellow embroidered flowers on it, but it didn't have puffed sleeves. She had also received a bike, but it was too cold and too snowy to ride it. She got a bag, also very pretty, that she could use as a purse or potentially to carry books in. But again, there was nothing she could do with that right now. Nothing except sit on the couch, surrounded by gifts and discarded wrapping while Bill played his game and Dad dozed off in his recliner on the other side of the room. She watched the game for a while. It was some sort of racing game where Bill had to build his own car and then beat the other cars on a very weird, winding racetrack. It didn't look at all fun to Sylvie. There was no story. There were no interesting people in it, just cars driving around. She brushed a pile of ripped wrapping paper off the middle of the couch and scooted closer to Bill. "You didn't get me a present," she said. "Yeah," he agreed, eyes fixed on the screen. "You didn't get me one either." This was true, so she couldn't really think of any response for a while. Finally, she said, "Well, want to get me one?" He glanced at her before looking back at the screen and trying frantically to keep his car from going off the road. "Now? What could I get now?" "Not get exactly. Just thought you might play with me." Bill's car ran off the road and exploded, resulting in the words "game over." He put the controller down and looked at her. "Play?" Bill was 13 now. He hadn't played with her in a long time. She didn't really even remember how long it had been. He would talk to her and watch movies with her and sometimes even play a game of checkers or something, but not play like with toys, like a kid. "Yeah, play. You know, like make-believe." She felt pretty sure he was going to say no. He even seemed to form his mouth to make the sound, but then to her amazement he said, "Sure, okay, Siv, what you want to play?" Should she suggest something he would likely be interested in, or push her luck and say what she really wanted to do? "We could play Anne of Green Gables." As she had feared, he laughed at her, but he didn't refuse. He asked, "How do we play that?" Encouraged, Sylvie explained, "We can just act out something from the book." "I don't really remember a lot about it, except when the girl found the mouse in the soup." It wasn't soup, it was sauce for a plum pudding. I'll just pick a part and tell you about it. Bill shrugged. Okay. Christmas joy bubbling up in her chest again, Sylvie skipped off to her room to retrieve the worn yellow copy. She also grabbed a few supplies and came back to the living room laden with notebooks, pencils, and a single piece of black construction paper. Bill eyed it all without much expression. We're going to play where Anne breaks her slate over Gilbert's head, she explained. He put up his hands. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I think I remember that part. I'm guessing I'm Gilbert, and I don't want anything broken over my head. He glanced back towards the TV. I'll just pretend, Sylvie hastened. See? It won't hurt. She held up the construction paper. Well, fine. He sat at the table as instructed, wrote gibberish in the notebook, and dutifully whispered "carrots" at Sylvie when prompted to do so. With all the fury one could wish, she slapped the black paper over his head, and he howled and pretended pain despite the harmless flopping of the paper. It delighted Sylvie. This was fun, she said when they had finished. Bill tousled her hair. It wasn't bad. Want to play my game with me? Sylvie glanced at the TV screen where Game Over still blinked. She hesitated. Do you really want me to? She asked. He laughed. I don't care. Then I think I'll just go read. Whatever you want. He tousled her hair again, which she did not like, but she endured it patiently. It was only fair after the time he'd spent playing. Then he went back to his game, and she went to snuggle up in her beanbag chair and pick up where she'd left off. October was a beautiful month at Green Gables, when the birches in the hollow turned as golden as sunshine. Year 9. The Christmas she turned 9, Sylvia's desire for a puff-sleeved dress hadn't diminished. She continued to add it to her list every single year. But she had something much more pressing on her mind. She had realized earlier in the year that she did not have a bosom friend. Oh, she had friends. Angie was half a year younger than her, and sometimes their moms took them both to the park. Liz was a little older and also enjoyed reading, though she preferred the Babysitters Club and seemed to have no interest in classics or the feeling that Sylvie tried to describe. Willa was all right, but Sylvie wasn't sure what she was interested in, other than clothes and her long blonde hair. But none of these came anywhere close to being a bosom friend like Anne had and Diana. They were nice, they were fun to play with sometimes, but they didn't understand Sylvie really. She couldn't share her feelings with them. She could never even have considered telling them about the fairies, and the one time she tried to talk to Liz about the tingling, longing sensation that she craved so much, Liz looked at her kind of funny and just said, yeah, then went back to talking about something else. Now, though, she had hope of something better. Now there was a new neighbor family, and they had a girl almost exactly Sylvie's age. They had arrived in October, to an apartment 2 floors down and 5 over from Sylvie's. At first she knew nothing about them. She just saw the moving truck come and go and boxes being carried. But this was fairly common in a large apartment building, so she had thought little of it. She still thought little of it when she saw the man and woman, also fairly common-looking, average height, average look, average everything. But then she saw her. The girl was perfect. A little plump, not in a bad way, but in a way that made her look endearing, especially paired with her long, sleek black hair. She dressed just the way that Sylvie liked to, simple dresses that looked pretty but were also easy to play in. Sylvie had seen her climbing the tree in the square to the back of the building, and she was very good at it. As if that wasn't enough, her status as future bosom friend was cinched when Sylvie found out the girl's name from Mom, who had met the other girl's mom in the lobby one day. Diane. Not quite Diana, but it was certainly close enough. Close enough that Sylvie knew it was meant to be. She put her plan into action. First, she needed to meet the girl. That was easy enough. Eventually, you were certain to run into most people who lived in the apartment if you hung around the public spaces enough. Sylvie knew Diane liked to climb trees, so whenever she played outside, she planted herself near the best climbing tree and waited. When Diane finally made an appearance, Sylvie suddenly remembered how shy she herself was. She always seemed to forget when she played situations out in her head. In her head, she was always much more confident and brilliant and eloquent than she seemed capable of being in real life, especially with strangers. But this was important. So as Diane approached, Sylvie swallowed her fear, stuck her right hand out, and said, "Hi." Diane stared but didn't offer her hand in response. "Hi," she said after an awkward pause. I'm Sylvie," Sylvie stammered. Diane put her hands in her pockets. "I know. My mom told me." Another awkward pause. My mom said your name is Diane." "That's right." More awkwardness. Sylvie gulped, reminded herself how vital this was, and forged ahead. "I saw you climbing the tree. You're really good at it." "Thanks." Diane's face brightened a little. "You like to climb?" "Yes, but I'm not very good at it." Instead of answering, Diane gripped a low branch of the tree and pulled her body up onto it with much more strength than Sylvie felt she had. "Come on up," the girl called, perching on the branch. Cautiously, Sylvie went around to the other side of the tree where there was a very large knot, large enough to get her foot into, and began climbing much more cautiously. It took her a few minutes to sidle onto the branch where Diane had sat, and by the time she got there, Diane had already shimmied up several branches more. Sylvie smiled up at her. "Like I said, I'm not very good at it," she called. Diane just laughed. This was in November, which meant that the holiday season was beginning again, which meant that things got busy. A couple more times the girls met out by the tree, though they didn't talk much. They mostly just climbed. Sylvie wanted to invite Diane to her birthday party, but her birthday fell too close to Thanksgiving that year, and Diane's family was going out of town. "We'll still have a good party," Mom reassured when she saw the disappointment on Sylvie's face at the news. "Angie and Liz and Willa are all coming. What kind of party do you want? A tea party?" Sylvie agreed to a tea party, but she didn't look forward to it as much as she had. She had been planning to ask Diane at the party to be her bosom friend. It would all be very solemn and beautiful. She had played the entire scene out in her mind. The two girls walking under the trees, Sylvie posing the question, Diane surprised and honored, a hug to seal the deal. Sylvie had worked out all the details of the oath they would use to swear eternal friendship, even if it was dreadfully wicked to swear. But that would just have to wait for another time. It would have to wait for a few more weeks, it turned out, between Christmas, shopping, and other family festivities. Driving around looking at Christmas lights with their traditional peppermint milkshakes making the cold even colder, a Charlie Brown Christmas on TV as soon as it came on, gingerbread house making, or at least Sylvie made a gingerbread house. Bill was determined to outdo himself every year, and this year the project was a grand gingerbread cathedral. He even made stained glass windows with melted hard candy, and he let Sylvie help him pick out the colors. Sylvie finally found another opportunity when Mom mentioned at dinner one night that she'd like to have a small Christmas party. "I know we don't have a lot of room," she said, "but it would be nice to host something this year." Dad put too many green beans in his mouth and took a while to chew before replying. "Sounds great. Who did you want to have?" "The Millers and the Sandersons, of course. Mr. and Mrs. Hazlitt. And I'm sure Sylvie will want the new neighbors." She smiled at Sylvie, who grinned back. "New neighbors?" Dad reached over to help Sylvie cut her chicken. "The Powells. You met him on the stairs a couple days ago?" "Oh, right. Sounds good to me." Sylvie kept smiling as she took a bite of her newly cut chicken. The day of the party came, and as it got closer, Sylvie got more nervous. Again, her imagined version of herself might be beautiful, confident, and even regal, but she had enough sense to know when faced with actuality that she was only a little girl, shy, worried about what people thought. What if she forgot the words when the time came? What if Diane said no? She honestly hadn't contemplated this possibility until the day before the party. It had all seemed so perfect, so meant to be. So why not? Why shouldn't she assume that it was a gift from the fairies? Time moved slowly the day of the party. Why was that? Why did time always go the exact opposite of the way you wanted? When Sylvie was waiting for something or doing something she hated, there was always plenty of time to go around. But when the something delightful came or when things were nice, the seconds flew by as though they had somewhere else to be. She kept looking at the clock, waiting for the big hand to point to the top and the little hand to point to the 7. As she waited, it began to snow. It was perfect. The trees, of course, had no white blossoms in winter, making her white way of delight into more of a brown way of mugginess, but the snow would transform the scene into the perfect setting for the beginning of a lifelong friendship. People began to arrive. Liz came with her parents right on time. "Why don't you two go into Sylvie's room to play?" Mom suggested after greetings had been made. Sylvie hesitated. "But shouldn't we wait for Diane? She's my guest too." Mom smiled. "I'll send her back when she gets here." Sylvie wasn't sure she approved of this arrangement. When Diane got here, she would want to move ahead with her plans as soon as possible. But if it was just the two of them and Liz, how to get Liz away without being rude? She couldn't think of any excuse to refuse, though, so she led Liz into her room, where they both looked at the new furniture in Sylvie's dollhouse. Liz was laughing as she swept the dollhouse floor with a teeny tiny broom when Diane tapped on the doorframe and came in. Sylvie jumped up and hurried to her. "Hi!" "Hey," said Diane. She glanced at the dollhouse. After a moment of silence, Sylvie remembered her manners. "Diane, this is my friend Liz. Liz, this is Diane, our new neighbor." Liz put the broom down, jumped up, and went to shake Diane's hand. After another silence, Diane looked over at the dollhouse again. "That looks pretty cool," she said. "It is," Liz exclaimed. "There's a tiny broom you can really sweep the floor with, and ceiling fans that actually go." The two girls went back over to the dollhouse, where Liz continued to expound on its wonders. Sylvie stood where she had been, near the doorway, watching in dismay. How was she supposed to fulfill her plans now? She cleared her throat. She had to be confident. It would be stupid to let this opportunity pass. "Hey, Diane." The girl turned her head and looked at Sylvie, waiting. "Want to go outside for a minute? I want to show you something." She knew it was rude. Liz looked at her and lowered her eyebrows a little. Would she ask to come along? If she did, how could Sylvie refuse? But she didn't have to worry about that, because Diane just said, "Nah," lightly, and went back to examining the dollhouse. Sylvie didn't know what to do. I really wanted to show you," she stammered. "It's snowing," Diane pointed out. "It's way too cold out there. Show me another time. I want to stay where it's warm." Liz kept looking at Sylvie, eyebrows still furrowed, as though she were trying to work something out. Sylvie took a deep breath and summoned all her courage. "Well then, can I talk to you for a minute?" Liz pinched her lips together. "If you want me to leave, you can just say so." And without waiting for a response, she tossed her hair and rushed out of the room. Diane and Sylvie looked after her for a moment. "What the heck?" was Diana's eloquent reaction. I'm sorry," Sylvie said, and then swallowed. She stepped a little closer to Diane. "I didn't mean to be rude. I just wanted to talk to you for a minute." "About what?" Diane glanced toward the door again. "Well, about being my bosom friend." "What the heck is a bosom friend?" This was not right. Not right at all. It wasn't supposed to go this way. A miserable feeling settled in the pit of Sylvie's stomach, but she continued anyway. "It's a forever friend, a closest friend, one who swears eternal love as long as the sun and the moon shall endure." The look she had pictured on Diane's face didn't appear. Instead, the girl bit her lip and looked again at the door. I don't really get it. I'll go get a cookie." And she bolted from the room and vanished. The miserable feeling took hold of Sylvie's entire body now. So this was what the depths of despair truly felt like. Acting without thinking, she grabbed her coat off the hook by her door, slipped out into the rest of the party, and unobtrusively made her way to the door. Once there, she opened it, stepped through, eased it shut, then ran. She ran down all the stairs and out of the building. The first breath of the snowy air bit her skin, but she ignored it, rushing around to the side of the apartments to find her little white way of delight. She found it, selected one especially sparkling snowy tree, threw herself against it, and sobbed. She didn't know how long she was there. Her face and hands got numb, but she ignored it. Or rather, she embraced it. It was right that she should find physical misery to match the humiliation of her soul. "Sylvie?" After who knew how long, she heard her mom's voice laced with worry. "Sylvie, there you are. We were all worried." She felt Mom's hands pull her away from the tree and rub her arms. "What's wrong?" "I'm in the depths of despair," moaned Sylvie. To her further humiliation, Mom smiled, though she seemed to be trying not to. "Sylvie, you can't stay out here in the cold. Come inside and tell me what happened." "I don't want to see them," Sylvie protested, pulling a little against Mom's grip on her arms. "I didn't say we had to go to our apartment." Moments later, Sylvie was thawing out on a couch in the building's lobby. Mom sat next to her, arm around her shoulders. "Who didn't you want to see?" she asked at last, seeming to know instinctively when Sylvie's lips stopped feeling so cold. The girls. Liz and Diane?" Sylvie nodded. Mom frowned. "Why? What did they say?" "Nothing." Sylvie buried her face in Mom's shoulder. It took several minutes of insistent questioning on Mom's part, but the whole terrible story finally came out. After it was over, Mom was silent for a moment. "Do you think that was polite to Liz?" she asked at last. "What else was I supposed to do?" Sylvie protested. Mom sighed. "Sylvie, you can't—" She paused. "Then, what did you expect would happen?" Sylvie shrugged and turned away. "I thought she would say yes. Diane, I mean." "You don't even really know Diane. She doesn't know you. Friendships take time. Like your friendship with Liz. You've known her since you were 5. "But she doesn't understand." "Does Diane?" Sylvie had nothing to say to this. Mom went on. "A true friend isn't someone who always agrees with you or understands everything you care about or who looks a certain way, Sylvie. The Bible says a friend is someone who is faithful, who wants the best for you. You can't find out those things about someone in a couple months. Diane might be a very nice girl, but you need time to get to know her, and you shouldn't throw your old friends away when someone more interesting comes along. That's not being a true friend yourself." She stopped and seemed to be waiting for Sylvie to respond, but she didn't know what to say. Her heart resisted what Mom was saying on the surface, that her desire for a bosom friend that matched her ideal could be wrong, but the core of what she'd said rang so true that she didn't know how to argue it. After a moment, Mom hugged her. "Let's go back up. You can stay with me if you want. The party will be over soon." Mutely, Sylvie nodded and followed Mom up the stairs to the celebration of Christmas. Year 10. "You're crazy." Wasn't exactly the response that Sylvie had expected. It certainly wasn't what she'd wanted to hear. "What's so crazy about that?" she protested. "You said you had a friend who did it." She and Liz were sitting under the trees in the crisp, almost winter air at the end of an unusually warm November. They had been reading, but now their books, Anne of Avonlea and Nancy Drew in the Hidden Staircase, lay discarded on the grass for the moment. Liz raised her eyebrows. "Yeah, but just the ends. You want to do your whole head." Sylvie shrugged. "So? It's the same difference. I mean, just more of the same thing." The eyebrows didn't go down. "Why?" Sylvie bit her lip. "I want to do it red for Christmas." "Liar. You just want to look like your beloved Anne. But you won't. Your hair is too dark, and Kool-Aid red isn't the same as red hair red." "I don't think it will look exactly the same, just a little bit closer." Liz rolled her eyes but stood up. "Fine. I assume you have Kool-Aid?" Things had been a little stiff between the two girls for a while after last year's Christmas party. Neither of them ever mentioned it, and as if by mutual agreement they eventually went back to normal. As for Diane, she had avoided Sylvie ever since the awkward encounter, and her family had moved out of the apartment a year after they moved in. Sylvie had watched them go with a feeling of relief, like a loosening in her chest. "How much do we need?" She picked up her book and started to lead the way back into the building. "Well, Katie used a whole packet to do the ends of her hair. I guess maybe 3 packets would be enough. We can always try it, and if it doesn't look good, you can try again." The girls climbed the stairs to Sylvie's apartment, which was completely silent. Mom's at Bible study, Sylvie explained. I think Bill is doing homework or something. That's all he ever does. Will your mom be okay with this? Liz asked, nervously twirling a strand of her own light brown hair as Sylvie climbed up on a stool to reach the second-to-top shelf of the pantry. Why would she care? There seemed to be no answer to this. She retrieved 3 packets of Kool-Aid, all of which was in the very back since they rarely made any except in the summer. Get a pitcher or some kind of big container, Liz instructed. Sylvie did so, and the girls retreated to the bathroom where they locked the door behind them. Liz read the directions on the back of the package aloud, and Sylvie carefully filled the pitcher to the gallon mark. Mom always adds sugar, Sylvie observed as Liz dumped the 3 packets in. You don't need the sugar for your hair, silly, just the color. Sylvie stared at the overly bright red as Liz ran back to the kitchen to get a wooden spoon to stir the concoction with. Her friend was right. It wasn't going to have the famous carrot tint she longed for. Did they make carrot Kool-Aid? But again, Liz was right. Her hair was so dark, it wouldn't be the same. Maybe someday when she was older. Liz returned with the spoon, and Sylvie stirred the mixture until it was evenly red all the way through. Now what? Sylvie asked. Liz twirled a strand of her own hair again. Katie just dipped the ends of her hair in and sat there for 30 minutes. I guess you just put your whole hair in for the same amount of time? Sylvie looked dubiously at the liquid. Okay. Gripping the pitcher in both hands, she climbed into the bathtub, set the pitcher down, reclined on her back, and slowly lowered her hair into the Kool-Aid. The girls chatted as they waited, Liz glancing at her watch now and then. 20 minutes in, they ran out of things to talk about and just sat for a while, Liz on the closed toilet, Sylvie half lying in the bathtub with her hair marinating in the juice. Liz, she said after a long silence. Yeah? I'm sorry I was weird last Christmas. Liz shrugged and looked away. You're always weird. Sylvie didn't know if that was serious or just a joke. I mean, I guess I was kind of rude to you. No reply. A minute or so went by. Sylvie couldn't really tell how long. Her head was cold and her elbows were very tired of propping her up. Did I hurt your feelings? She finally worked up the nerve to ask. Liz just shrugged again and studied the back of a torn Kool-Aid packet. I didn't mean to. I know. Like I said, you're weird. Liz didn't say more, but she smiled a little, so Sylvie took that to mean she was forgiven. After another few minutes of silence, Liz looked at her watch again and stood up. You're almost done. In a minute you'll have to rinse your hair to get the extra out. Don't wash it or anything, just rinse a little so it doesn't stain your clothes and stuff. Yell when you're dressed again. And she left the bathroom. Sylvie looked down in dismay at her clothes. How was she supposed to do this? Why hadn't she thought to undress before she put her hair in? If she pulled her hair out now, juice would surely get all over everything. But there was no way she could do it with her hair still in the pitcher. An Anne-worthy predicament. She couldn't help but smile. Maybe she could sort of slowly twist her hair and squeeze it as she pulled it out, and most of the extra would go back into the pitcher. A loud knock at the door startled her, and her elbows slipped, making her head come down on the pitcher, which sent the pitcher onto its side. Sylvie screamed as bright red juice flooded the tub, and she jumped up, gripping the bar on the bathtub wall for support. You okay? Came Mom's voice. Sylvie looked down at herself. She was dripping with red. Her clothes, her hair, her arms. She could feel the cold dribbling down her face. She sighed. I'm okay. She emerged from the bathroom a quarter of an hour later in a bathrobe with her stained clothes wrapped in a towel which she carried in her arms. What in the... Mom said. Liz was nowhere to be seen. Just a minute. Sylvie ran through the living room, through the kitchen, and into the laundry room where she dumped her load into the washing machine. Sylvie Keller, Mom cried, following her into the room. What is dripping off your hair? Sylvie swallowed. Kool-Aid? I thought maybe Liz told you. Mom sighed and grabbed a towel out of the dryer. I sent Liz home. Her mother called and wanted her back. She quickly twisted Sylvie's hair into the towel. The back of your robe is bright red. I'm sorry. No words for a moment. Then Sylvie spoke again, unable to look at her mom. It's kind of sticky, too. Your hair? Mom shook her head. Did you use sweetened Kool-Aid? I don't know. Well, we need to rinse your hair out a lot more than this, regardless. Mom made Sylvie take 2 more showers before she was satisfied that the red was finished dripping. Then she helped her dry it. Sylvie studied herself in the mirror, looking in vain for the red she had been so excited about. It's not very... Mom shook her head, running her fingers through Sylvie's hair. Your hair is too dark to dye, sweetie. It might show a little red in the sunlight. Want to go out tomorrow morning and check? Sylvie nodded, but her heart felt heavy. Mom turned her and kissed her forehead. Your hair is pretty just the way it is. And regardless, you should have talked to me first. I could have shown you how to do it so it wouldn't get everywhere or be sticky. I thought you might say no. Sylvie was ashamed of herself as the words left her mouth. All the more reason you should have asked. Mom guided her out of the bathroom and turned off the light. You're not in trouble. I'm pretty sure that your disappointment is punishment enough this time. But I wish you would see your hair the way I do. I think it's perfectly pretty. With another forehead kiss, Mom went to get dinner ready. Lying in bed that night with a towel on her pillow in case more red came off while she slept, Sylvie touched her hair again. It was still a tiny bit sticky. She was glad Mom liked her hair. She truly was, but it wasn't perfect. The one comfort of the day was that it reminded her of when Anne had accidentally dyed her hair green. In her heart she was like Anne. That was what mattered. And at least she didn't have to cut it all off. That was one comfort. Year 11. Sylvie's 11th year did not start well. You must want something else, Mom insisted, staring at the Christmas gift list Sylvie had handed her. Sylvie shook her head. She didn't feel that a puff-sleeve dress was that much to ask for. After all, she got dresses all the time. It couldn't be that hard to find one with puffed sleeves and get it for her. She had been asking for long enough, that was sure. This, she decided, was the year. She had envisioned herself many times, donning the dress with its glorious sleeves, sailing down the church aisles with everyone looking on admiringly. Mom sighed. Sylvie, sweetheart, how many times have you read it? She didn't have to explain what it was, but she did nod toward Sylvie's nightstand, where her worn copy lay next to her lamp. I lost count, Sylvie lied. The answer was 37. Mom looked again at the list, then again at the book. She rubbed her head. Then she walked over to the nightstand, picked up the book, and tucked it under her arm. I want you to wait a while before you read it again, she said, and I want you to think of some more things for your Christmas list. Sylvie's heart felt like it dropped to the very soles of her feet. Every part of her burned to ask why, even though she wasn't supposed to. She tried to make her eyes ask it for her, letting them stare widely at her mother. Mom understood. She sat on the edge of the bed and patted a spot next to her. Sylvie walked to the bed and lowered herself beside Mom. I'm glad you love the book, sweetie. It's a good book. There are good things in it. But I don't think it's good for you right now. Can I ask why? Sylvie swallowed, hoping that would be okay. It's good to love books, but we should love things in the right order. We should love God first, then family, then other people, then other things. Have you lost count of reading your Bible? Or of how many times you've showed kindness to us and your friends? Sylvie didn't know what to say to this. She could only protest, I do love God, and I do love my family and friends. Not as much as you love this book, I think. Sometimes it's good to take a little break from something if it takes up too much of our hearts. It's healthy to step away and maybe focus on other things for a while, then come back and see if our perspective has changed. Again, Sylvie didn't know how to argue with this. All she said was, for how long? Mom kissed her forehead. I think until Christmas would be fair. That's a little over a month. Then she left, taking the book with her. Sylvie had only thought that her misadventures with Diane, with her hair, or anything else had put her into the depths of despair. This This was the real thing. A whole month, more than a month, with no Anne to keep her company, no way to peruse her favorite passages over again. And she had a feeling that if she just read the other books in the series, it wouldn't quite fit Mom's idea of taking a little break. I don't need a break, she murmured to herself. It's not bad to love something beautiful. She hadn't thought about it before, but Mom was more than a little like Marilla. She loved Sylvie, just like Marilla loved Anne. She wanted the best for her, of course. She was good. She just didn't understand her. She wasn't a kindred spirit. Thankfully, the month was a busy one. There was Christmas shopping to be done, decorating, a few parties, cookies to decorate, lights to see, caroling to do. For the first week, though, even these delights didn't distract Sylvie from the tiny hole in her heart. She would snuggle into bed at night and look wistfully at the spot on her nightstand where the book should be. Sometimes she would try to read something else, but even her favorites felt somehow less bright with this shadow hanging over her. "Have you thought of anything else for your Christmas list yet?" Mom asked a couple weeks before Christmas. "No, I'm sorry, I can't think of anything." It was true. Sure, she could have thought of something else to write. The stores were full of toys that any girl her age would want, and the bookstores were full of interesting books, but nothing she especially wanted came to mind. Mom patted her hand. "Well, I bet I can think of something." Sylvie smiled a little. She wasn't getting the dress, that she knew. So while she was sure Mom would make a good choice, she was good at gift-giving. She didn't care much what it might be. The week before Christmas, Sylvie sat below the window looking up at the stars. The fairies. The ache in her heart when she thought about her missing book was less than when it had first been taken away, but it was still there. She knew that somewhere in her heart she was clinging to it, holding on to the hurt on purpose. Wouldn't it make more sense to let it fade and fully enjoy the Christmas season? But feeling no pain at all, wouldn't that make the book matter less? If she didn't miss it, didn't it mean nothing at all? Dad tapped on the doorframe of her open room as she thought through all this. "Doing all right, sweetums?" "I'm fine. About to go to bed." Dad shuffled into the room and sat down next to her. "It's just another week," he said. She smiled. Dad was very busy with work this time of year, too busy to talk much, but he always seemed to understand a little better than Mom. "Yeah." He pointed up at the stars. "You like looking at them, don't you?" She nodded, then thought for a moment. I like to pretend they're fairies," she confessed, hoping he would understand. "Tell me more," was all he said in response. So she told him all of it, about the visits up to them, how they couldn't speak, how she had seen them in the Christmas tree too, and how she liked to talk to them and thank them for the beauty in her life. She finished with, "Mom doesn't like it when I talk about them. She says it isn't real." "No," Dad agreed. "But you know that, I think." Sylvie pulled her knees up to her chest. "Sort of. But, I know it's just pretend, but I sort of believe it's real, too. It's hard to explain." They were both quiet for a minute. Then Dad scooted a little closer. "Can I tell you something?" he said. She nodded. "For me, it was aliens." "Aliens?" she giggled. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when I was a kid, I was convinced there were aliens out in the stars. I didn't visit them or anything. I don't quite have your imagination, but I did like to think about them." Sylvie laughed. "Do you still?" Dad smiled. "No. I like movies or books that have aliens in them still. It's just interesting to think about and hear stories about. But that's it. I stopped thinking about it as much when I was about your age." "Why?" Instead of directly answering, Dad put his arm around her and asked a question of his own. "You know how we read the Christmas story from the Bible every Christmas?" "Yes." Sylvie snuggled close to him, feeling a little sleepy. "I think that's why we like thinking about things like fairies and aliens. Those things aren't real, but they're exciting because it's something bigger than the rest of life. It's something we can dream about. Other worlds and magical things." A tiny spark of the tingly, longing feeling lit in Sylvie's chest. And I think we're supposed to like that feeling, that otherworldly feeling, because we are supposed to belong to another world, to heaven with God. And it's so much different and more beautiful than what we have here. We don't know exactly what it's like, but we know it's what we are made for. That's what Christmas is about in the first place, about Jesus coming to us to save us, so we could be forever in that other world. The spark settled into a soft, glowing fire that warmed Sylvie from her head to her toes and made her feel sleepier, but a little more content than she had in a long time. She blinked long, slow blinks. So, we like to dream of and wish for other worlds, but we shouldn't stop there, We should take those dreams and eventually point them past the fairies, the aliens, the planets, and whatever else, and point them where they were meant to go in the first place, to our forever home. Forever home, Sylvie murmured, barely able to keep her eyes open anymore. Dad stood up and picked her up off the floor. That's why Mom took the book away, Sylvie. It's a good book. It woke you up to wanting something, but maybe it wasn't quite the right thing. Then he carried her to her bed, tucked her in, turned off the lights, and left her to fall asleep on the wings of his words. Beautiful words. Kindred words. Words she knew that Anne would love as much as she did. On Christmas morning, she listened to the story more attentively than before and paid less attention to the cookies. As she had expected, she didn't get the dress she wanted, but the box Mom handed her was heavy. She opened it, unfolding the wrapping paper a little at a time rather than tearing it. It contained a white cardboard box. She opened the box and saw a beautiful amber-colored leather book with an ornately, delicately embossed cross covering the front cover. And down on the bottom right corner in silver script read the words, Sylvie Marie Keller. It's beautiful, Sylvie breathed as she lifted it from the box. Thank you, Mom and Dad. You should have one of your own, Mom smiled. And I know you like beautiful things. Sylvie ran her thumb along the silver-covered paper edges, then opened the cover and turned a couple of the pages. Pages as delicate as fairy wings. She closed it, thinking about all that Dad had said to her, then laid it beside her on the couch, wondering if there were things in there that might thrill her the way he had talked about, a thrill pointing to another world. Then she saw in the bottom of the box her beloved, tattered yellow paperback. She clutched it and hugged it tightly. Mom laughed. Merry Christmas, Sylvie. Year 12. She didn't leave puff-sleeve dress off her Christmas list the next year, but she did add a few more things. And when she looked at the list before she handed it off to Mom, she realized something. There were no toys on it. There were books and, of course, the dress and some shoes she had seen that she liked and a new chair for her room. Did that mean she was a grown-up now? Or at least not so much a little girl anymore? Mom smiled and shook her head when she saw the dress's appearance yet again on the list, but she didn't complain. I thought we could go shopping on Saturday, was all she said. Sylvie agreed eagerly. She could do Dad shopping then and get a little something for Bill, and if she had the money, something for Liz and Angie and Willa. Then Dad would take her out some other time, if tradition continued, probably just a day or two before Christmas, and help her pick out something for Mom. It was the coldest winter Sylvie could remember. When Saturday came, she bundled up with gloves and a hat and everything. Snow had come before Thanksgiving and looked like it meant to stay for a good long while. What do you want, Mom? Sylvie asked as they drove to the mall, for Christmas. Mom never had an answer to this question, other than very uninteresting ones like a clean apartment or I don't really want anything. You must want something, Sylvie prompted when Mom didn't get past the I can't think of anything, she said. I'm pretty sure I have everything I want. Nobody has everything they want, Sylvie countered. Mom smiled. No, that's true. But I don't think I want anything you can get from a store. Or if I do, it just isn't coming to mind. They spent all afternoon in and out of stores with a food court lunch break in the middle and ice cream at the end, despite the freezing temperatures. And by the time they drove home, it was just dark enough that they could see some of the Christmas lights. "Do you want a house, Mom?" Sylvie was surprised she had never thought of this. Mom had never mentioned it, but all of their friends had houses, and they'd lived in the same apartment for 12 years. Mom smiled a little. "What makes you ask that?" "I don't know. I was just thinking about how we don't get to put out Christmas lights." Mom was silent for a moment. "I think a house could be nice," she said, "but I also love our home. It's been a good place for us for a long time. Do you want a house?" Sylvie shrugged. "I've never really thought about it." "That's good," Mom smiled. "It's good to focus on what we have more than what we wish we had." "But hadn't Dad said that it was good to wish for other things? That we were supposed to long for a world better than this one?" Sylvie puzzled over it the whole drive home, then got busy wrapping presents and forgot about it for the time being. Christmas morning came with all its family tradition, just as it always did. The story was read, the cookies eaten, Mom and Dad's presents given and received. But after this was done, there was still one gift with Sylvie's name on it. She examined it. "Who's this from?" she asked. "It's from me, silly," Bill said from the corner where he was chewing his 9th cookie. "You haven't gotten me anything in a long time." "Guess this should make up for it then." He didn't seem like he cared very much about it. Or rather, she studied his face for a moment, which was focused on his plate of cookies. Was his face a little red? She picked up the box and carried it back to her spot on the couch. She unwrapped the paper and opened the box inside. At first, all she could see was brown fabric folded neatly. Curious and with a faint, inexplicable feeling of apprehension, she pulled the object out and let it fall open. It was a dress, a brown dress that looked like it might go a little below her knees. It had flower-shaped buttons down the front and vertical ruffles all the way down the skirt, and it had the puffiest, fluffiest sleeves one could imagine. And it was the ugliest dress Sylvie had ever seen. She couldn't decide whether to laugh or cry. She couldn't even decide how she felt. "Bill," she said, letting her voice trail off. "I know, it's kind of dumb," he said, grinning sheepishly. "I just know you always said you wanted it, with the biggest sleeves or whatever. And I looked in the book and saw that the one in the book was brown, so I kept looking until I found that one." That was the moment that Sylvie understood. This was what Mom and Dad had both been trying to tell her for so long. How could she have missed it? In her search for the most Anne-ish life possible, how could she never have noticed it? She had a mother and a father, living, who loved her. She had a brother of her very own, who cared enough to look high and low for a ridiculous dress she thought she wanted. She had a home that had always been hers. She had friends. She even had a romantic name and long, dark hair. She, Sylvie Keller, had everything Anne had always wanted. Why strive for something else when she had the most perfect everything? "Do you like it?" Bill asked, still grinning. Sylvie dropped the dress and jumped up to hug him around the neck. "I love it," she said, laughing joyously. Then she sat back down to bask in the glow of a perfect Christmas, knowing that today she was perhaps closer to Anne than she had ever truly been. "God's in his heaven, all's right with the world," whispered Sylvie of Amber Apartments softly. This has been Sylvie of Amber Apartments by J. Grace Pennington. Narrated by J. Grace Pennington. Copyright 2020 by J. Grace Pennington. Production copyright 2024 by J. Grace Pennington. All rights reserved.